This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 37 of Season 2 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, September 11th, 1909. I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford 114 years ago. The first section is the About Town section. Arthur H. Burnham, one of the large farmers on the border of Parkerville, has fodder corn growing for the silo that measures 12 feet 4 inches in height. If the usual amount of rainfall had followed it, where would it have been by this time? You might recall that this particular summer was kind of a drought summer in Westford. George A. Kimball, another prosperous farmer, right in the density of Parkerville, is improving the village appearance by dressing up his buildings in a new coat of paint, also adding temptations to the attractions of Brickyard Hill with his mountain rose peaches. The Kimball farm was the one that was in the triangle there between Concord Road, Carlisle Road, and Old Lowell Road. Joseph David Lafayette Mudgett of Westford, Vermont, is making his abiding place with Terence Revello Parker Decatur of Westford as plowman, milkman, harvester, and general dandy handyman. Plenty of name for fame. John Adams Taylor has finished taking the school census and left town Tuesday noon for Miami University, Ohio. The census report shows 448 school children between the ages of 5 and 15, 229 boys and 219 girls, a gain of 13 school children over last year. Arthur Warren of Chelmsford has moved his portable sawmill onto Oak Hill and will soon commence cutting the pine lot recently purchased of Walter Emerson, also close by all the lumber on the Noah Shapley lot. The lumber on both these lots is in vigorous growing condition and necessarily small. Between unfortunate fires and premature cutting, Oak Hill is no longer the beauty spot it once was. State Forester Rain, R-E-I-N-E, might profitably be introduced to encourage the reign, R-E-I-G-N, of scientific forestry on this sky-towering hill. It was regretted by all admirers of that plain, rugged, practical type of life characteristic of early New England when it was learned that Reverend Benjamin H. Bailey, a physical, moral, social, and spiritual type of this life, was ill and unable to resume Sunday services at the close of the vacation last Sunday. Besides the above class, who especially regret it, everybody does who ever knew him. Labor Day at the Old Oak and Bucket Farm, that was the name of Samuel L. Taylor's farm, the author of the About Town section of the Wardsman. Labor Day at the Old Oak and Bucket Farm was observed with variety. Some went to the auto races, some stayed to the long tennis races, some were worldly and grasped the plow handles and clung to worldliness until retribution broke the plow point, and the horses helped themselves with speed to stable recreation. Among those who sported on the lawn tennis court were Emerson brothers of Chelmsford, Reverend J.D. Sarley of Hanover. Among relatives who helped and looked on were Amelia, Emily, and Lyman Proctor of Cambridge, Mrs. Helen H. Taylor, Miss Bessie Dam, and Miss Susan Hannaford of Lowell, Mr. and Mrs. Fred Snow of Chelmsford. For a real picture of thrifty prosperity, just cast your eyes sideways, unless you are cross-eyed, into the lawn farmyard of Charles W. Whitney and see that bright, shining, labor-saving machine only a few hours out from the manufacturer. This is the farm now where the planting will get the start of St. Patrick's Day in the morning, and some of the other early birds will have to ride on the rear seat as passengers only. Some say it will be an airship next. Reverend Benjamin H. Bailey is in town again after vacation season and looking better in the behavior of his health, and the Unitarian Church will open tomorrow, the 12th. The next section is called The School Question. For the first time in history, the old Stony Brook School closed its doors for the period of a school term. Such was the case Tuesday, when the autumn term of the schools opened and the scholars of this ancient and honorable district were transported by electric cars to all that is modern and attractive at the William F. Frost School at the center. The size of the tax bills this year does not seem to hint at depreciation of farm property, and the jolly, smiling good time of the scholars riding to and fro so far is a rebuttal of the foretold evils of transportation. There is talk of an article in the next annual town warrant to build a new two-story schoolhouse at Brookside. As this is a manufacturing center, it has the appearance of wisdom, and the writer is inclined to favor it. But let us be wise enough to profit by past experiences to know what we want and where we want it. Within the space of a little over 25 years, the town has built 12 new schoolhouses and closed 6 of them. The first new schoolhouse at Graniteville was not what was wanted, nor where it was wanted, and the second new schoolhouse was built. The first new schoolhouse at Westford Center was not what was wanted, nor where it was wanted, and the second new schoolhouse was built. So that we have gone all over the town once with new schoolhouses and have commenced to go over it the second time, so that building schoolhouses and abandoning them seems to keep us in a whirl of a stir all the time. Solomon has a sermon on "With all thy getting, get wisdom." Hadn't we better stock up with wisdom before we stock up with more schoolhouses? That quote from Solomon, from the Bible about Solomon, is from Proverbs 4, chapter 4, verse 7, which reads, "Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding." But it is often misquoted as, "With all thy getting, get wisdom." The next section is the Grange. At the last meeting of the Grange, Leonard W. Wheeler occupied part of the lecturer's hour by some practical points and statistics on, quote, adulteration of food, end quote, and several members spoke briefly and wisely on, quote, farm life in the house, end quote. On the question of making an exhibit by the Grange at the Middlesex North Fair, as by invitation of Chelmsford Grange, it was voted nearly unanimously not to exhibit. The dry weather conditions, as affecting fruit and vegetables, had much to do with the vote. At the next meeting of the Grange next week, Thursday evening, Concord and Tingsboro Granges will be the invited guests and will furnish the literary entertainment. Supper will be in charge of the ladies' degree team of Westford, which is another name in part of excellence and abundance. Let there be abundance of attendance. The trustees of Middlesex North Society held a meeting at the American House in Lowell last week, Thursday, to make arrangements for the fair to be held at Chelmsford next week, Wednesday and Thursday. Chelmsford Grange has charge and promises a band of music day and evening, weather permitting, concert on the park, exhibition of fruit and vegetables at Town Hall, open day and evening, exhibition of cattle near the park, dinner and speeches at Oddfellows Hall Thursday. It is hoped that the recent automobile promenade contest will not tend to sidetrack this ancient and honorable exhibition of what brains can do for the soil. The 19,000 acres that make the territory of Westford were once a part of Chelmsford. Let a few birthday remembrances be sent to this fair as a sort of, quote, account of our stewardship, end quote. Actually, Westford today, anyway, has 20,051 acres, 1,000 acres more than was quoted in this paragraph. The next section is Westford Center. Mrs. Hiram Whitney, who has been abroad since early in April, arrived in New York Saturday of last week and expects to be in Westford the last of this week. Samuel H. Balch is having his annual vacation as mail carrier on Route number 2. Warren E. Karkin is substituting for him during the 2 weeks he is absent. James S. Gill of Ludlow, Vermont, was the guest of his sister, Mrs. J. Herbert Fletcher, over Sunday and Labor Day, taking in the races with Mrs. Fletcher Monday. Mrs. H.N. Jocks and daughter Dorothy, who have been spending the summer with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. William Sutherland, are enjoying a trip to the White Mountains. Among the teachers from Westford returning to their duties in other places are Miss Jenny Chandler and Miss Lila Fisher to Boston, Miss Edna Ferguson to Beverly, Miss Jenny Ferguson to Island Falls, Maine, Miss Stella Hartford to Hempstead, New Hampshire, Miss Ruth Tuttle to Winthrop, and Miss Edith Wright to Ayer. Edmund Baker is the caretaker of the William E. Frost School this year, and A.I. Bicknell resumes his duties of many years at the Academy. If you're not familiar with the name A.I., as in A.I. Bicknell, it's capital A, little I, and it's pronounced just like the two letters. George M. Balch was at his father's over Sunday and Labor Day. Mrs. J. Henry Colburn and son Clarence are visiting her father, J.S. Nathans, in New York City. A number of patrons of Westford Grange attended the first meeting of the season at Lowell of the North Middlesex Pomona, Friday, September 3rd. At the William E. Frost School, the enrollment of scholars is about 125, about 25 of this number being from the Stony Brook district. The next section is called Party. Mrs. J. Herbert Fletcher entertained delightfully at her home last week, Thursday afternoon, the event being a shower party in honor of her cousin, Miss Emma G. Holt of West Chelmsford. The guests were mostly Miss Holt's former classmates at the Lowell Normal School, and who are now teachers in various places, but for the time being, happy schoolgirl fun took the place of the schoolroom dignity, and the gathering knew not a dull moment. The shower of gifts was a miscellaneous one, and it was a pretty collection, each offering enhanced in value with its accompaniment of loving goodwill. These were arranged in the white embroidered parasol belonging to the hostess, tied with white ribbons, ingeniously descending upon the blindfolded recipient. Among these gifts were pieces of embroidered linen, china, pictures, etc. At the close of this part of the festivities, a luncheon was served at small tables on the veranda. This was screened in with branches of birch, studded with blossoms of hydrangeas. The centerpieces of each table were of sweet peas. The delicious menu was of chicken salad, heart-shaped sandwiches, ice cream, cakes, and coffee. The place cards were of white hearts with dainty cupids. After luncheon, the guests were grouped on the lawn and had their pictures taken, and the prospective bride had hers taken separately in a chair trimmed with white ribbons. After this, the guests took their departure with many assurances to their hostess of a happy time, and to Miss Ruth Tuttle, who assisted Mrs. Fletcher in arranging this pleasant event. In the Mission House, Sunday, September 12th, this is from Ford's Village now, this next section. In the Mission House, Sunday, September 12th, the sessions of the Sunday School will be resumed at 3:30, and the hour of evening prayer will be 4:30. Henry Story of Hudson, formerly a resident here, has returned to the village and engaged on a contract of carpentering for William C. Edwards. He's the local builder in town, or one of the local builders in town. 2 large families from Canada have come to the village this week and have taken the Michael Bradley place to live in for the present. Our village schools commenced Tuesday with the usual number of pupils and teachers. Miss Alice Prescott has accepted a position in one of the Andover schools for the coming year, in place of the school at Ashland, New Hampshire. Miss Elva Libby, who has been visiting at W.E. Parsons, returned to her home at Easton, Maine, Saturday. Next is the Graniteville section. During this week, while the mills and shops have been closed, the help employed with the different firms have taken advantage of their brief vacation and are spending the time in various ways. The majority of the people attended the automobile races on the Lowell Boulevard, the big races on Monday and Wednesday being the principal attraction. Others took in the New England ball games, while quite a few went on brief fishing trips. The mills of the Abbott Worsted Company resumed work on Thursday morning, while C.G. Sargent's machine shop remained closed the entire week. Alfred Prynne is now taking a brief vacation that is being spent with friends in Portland, Maine. Mr. and Mrs. T.A. Riney, with their little daughter Alice, have recently returned from a month's sojourn in the province of Quebec. Miss Emily Prynne, who has been at Bethlehem, New Hampshire during the summer months, is now in her home in the village. Miss Laura Healy returned from Sugar Hill, New Hampshire a few days ago and is now suffering with a severely sore hand, the result of blood poisoning. Miss Lily Moran has recently returned from a very pleasant vacation at Beachmont. All the schools in this village were open Monday morning, September 6th, for the fall term and the beginning of the school year. The teachers and children appear to be greatly pleased with the new drinking fountains that have been recently installed in the school building. There were no sessions held on Monday afternoon, the teachers attending a meeting in Littleton. Mrs. John Agnew, with her daughters, Jessie May and Charlotte of West Chelmsford, have been guests of Janet Agnew in this village. That's the news in Westford for the week ending September 11th, 1909. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Nick Woodbury of Westford Cat for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from a century ago. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.